Hello, the viewers and listeners. Today it was another good day that you're having this session again. But it's a different time. Normally we have it in the evenings at 8. Today we have it at 12 daytime. With me is Dr. Paji, taking us through vitamin D and lack of vitamin D or vitamin D deficiency, and also he'll be touching on the therapy groups and especially for us who are staying in like cold areas. So how we how what we need to do to ensure that we take care of the vitamin D in our bodies. Dr. Paji, welcome and tell us a little bit about yourself. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation, and hello, listeners. My name is Pachi I'm a specialist in medical doctor. I work at Ulua Hospital, where I care for women that are pregnant, and I care for women who are delivering their babies. I've lived in Hawaii for nearly 20 years. Before that, I was born and trained in London, UK. I've been married for 20 plus years and have two elderly teenagers.
Nice. Thank you. We are talking about vitamin D. Could you talk about enlighten us about vitamin D and also like the deficiency of vitamin D in our bodies?
Unlike vitamin D is basically a substance that we have in our bodies to make sure that we absorb enough calcium from our system into our bloodstream. We often think about vitamin D, calcium in relation to bones. But calcium in itself is an essential requirement for the normal functioning of nearly all the cells in our bodies. From the nerve cell signaling in our brains to normal muscle cell function, and also to the healthy functioning of our immune system and immune cells. So without calcium available daily, our bodies just would not function. Our bones are in a sense our calcium store. So when we don't get enough calcium into our body from the digestive system, then there are other hormones that will basically tap into the stores of calcium that are in our bones, make up for it that we're not getting from light and without vitamin D. So if this situation continues over a long enough period, and we're talking years, then bones will lose their mineral and stiff content, and they become weak. And in children, we recognise this condition as rickets, where classically children appear bow-legged because the bones have literally become bendy. So vitamin D, we need vitamin D so we can pull calcium from our digestive system, from our diet, and make it available to our blood in our bloodstream. We don't start using our needed bone stores. We need healthy, strong bones as well. So I suppose the next question would be, where do we get vitamin D from?
Thank you.
Unlike most vitamins, which we need to get almost totally from our diet, vitamin D is actually something that our bodies make themselves. 90% of it is made on the surface of our skin from the exposure to the ultraviolet emitting the sun. The building brick of vitamin D is basically the cholesterol molecule, which we have already available in our bodies. So without sun available, the other source is through foodstuffs in our diet, the rich vitamin D, and I can mention some of the particular foodstuffs later, if you like.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Are there specific people who are very vulnerable to vitamin D deficiency, and why, for example?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's a big list, but if I could say a little bit about vitamin D, just to continue further about the production of vitamin D in our body, the active vitamin D is not what we produce in our skin. What we produce in the skin can be stored in our body, and when it's required, it gets processed first in the liver, and then it goes to another process in our kidney. And then what you have at the end of that is the active vitamin which works on the absorption. Now, I mentioned the sun. Now, sun, and most of our vitamin D is obtained through the exposure to sun. So basically, anybody who's not getting enough sunlight is at risk of developing vitamin D deficiency. So if you're around the equator of the planet, even with brown skin which stops burning, the intensity of the sun is so strong that we get more than enough exposure. The intensity of the sun is further away from the equator, If we live in North America, in the whole of Europe lies about 40 degrees north of the equator. The intensity of the rays of the sun are only really affected in the summer periods, and in the winter there is basically not enough energy to generate the production of vitamin D. So basically exposure to sunlight, and that also depends on which time of the year. So in the winter we need a diet. In the summer we can rely on the sun if we allow ourselves to be exposed enough. The quality of the type of the person's skin will also determine how easily they absorb vitamin D. So the lighter the skin, the easier it produces burn. We don't want to get but the easier it is, then also to produce vitamin D. You don't need as long exposures to produce the same amount of vitamin D. The darker the skin, the more of the energy of the sun is in a sense blocked by the dark pigment, and the longer exposure time you need in order to produce the same amount of vitamin D. Obviously, when you live in the equator, the intensity of the sun is so strong that the degree of pigmentation maybe doesn't make so much of a difference. But the further you go from the equator, and when you live in temperate, we live in Scandinavia, then pigment of skin can actually make a significant difference to a person's ability to produce vitamin D from sunlight. So basically, people who are brown skin, dark skin, will have a greater difficulty producing their own vitamin D. So probably need more dietary intake as well. Also, there's the age of the skin. People, even if you're light skin, your skin will produce only a quarter of the amount of vitamin D from the same exposure, sunlight exposure, as you would when you were a young adult. And this, as explained, that the vitamin D is unlike other vitamins, actually we can store that. So it's very good that in summer we build up a store, but when we don't get enough sunlight exposure, we can tap into that store through the winter. And everybody will basically lose a quarter of their vitamin D stores through the winter. So if you start off with a very low store, and you haven't had enough exposure in the summer, then you're going to become very quickly vitamin D deficient just by the winter if you are eating better and moving around with that.
Okay, so maybe I will just so for us dark people in Norway, how do we generate vitamin D especially during this winter? Just around the question.
Well, in the winter months, just about nobody can rely on the sun to produce enough vitamin D. So you'll need to get your vitamin D from dietary intake. If you've had enough exposure during the summer months, you may have a high amount of vitamin D stored up in your body, but as soon as you stop getting exposed to the sun, you'll begin to tap into that, and in order to, in a sense, keep that bank filled, get enough from diet. There are some other groups that also are at risk of vitamin D deficiency, and those are people who have problems with foods because they're not aware of what kind of foods contain vitamin D. There are those who are having the right they'll have digestive problems with their digestive system, which means they don't absorb the vitamin D. There are some people available. Some people using particular types of drugs. For example, this is not an exhaustive list, but for example, some drugs used for treatment of HIV and tuberculosis work against the absorption of vitamin D. And then obviously, if you have a very sick liver or very sick kidneys, as I explained, the conversion of the vitamin D produced in your skin to the active vitamin it needs liver and kidney function working. So again, people who have sickly kidneys may more easily become.
Okay, thank you. We are moving to COVID-19, vitamin D deficiency, and then winter. What is the relation between the three now? Yeah, vitamin D, COVID-19, and winter.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Well, it's good that you use the word correlation because nowhere here can we talk about cause. Observations that have been made that have shown an association between COVID-19 and vitamin D are just correlated assumptions. Nobody's saying that low vitamin D causing a serious infection. But you asked what is the correlation? Okay. I've already mentioned now that the lack of sunlight in the winter to lower vitamin D levels. And we see this. You see that vitamin D levels are the highest at the end of summer, the lowest at the end of winter, which is around February, March. If you look at most the seasonal respiratory infections, they often in the winter very often, which in a sense is in keeping with low vitamin D levels. Now, vitamin D is important for healthy lungs, and there have been studies that show, well, firstly, there are studies that show an association between low vitamin D and forms of ill health, but also the tendency to develop respiratory tract infections. And all the many randomized controlled trials which have tried to look at, you can say take more vitamin D, that helps. Does that help with your bones? Does it help with your muscles? Does it help with depression? There are lots of different studies that are trying to look at vitamin D supplementation to improve ill health. They haven't been actually successful. They haven't proven that just taking vitamin D to make it healthy. But there is quite good evidence to show that people, particularly who are vitamin D deficient, take supplementation with vitamin D, have been shown to have a significant reduction in their risk of developing respiratory tract infection. And moving into the winter, which is when they inevitably occur, that's why I think this is important. So, COVID aside, or coronavirus aside, coronavirus is a type of coronavirus, and coronaviruses are amongst seasonal respiratory tract infections that people pick up. It's just that this particular coronavirus is particularly nasty. But coronavirus aside, the evidence seems to suggest that people who are particularly vitamin D deficient, taking supplements, or sure their diet has enough vitamin D in it, will reduce their risk of developing respiratory tract infection. And that, I think, is a good enough reason to highlight this now, before we are in the middle of winter. And then there's and then there's as I said, I'm not here to sell snake oil. I don't work as a private doctor. In any pharmaceutical company shares anything. So what I'm talking about, this is in a sense aside from what I do as a day job. But it interests me because I think there's a benefit to sensitizing people who are at greater risk of it, vitamin D deficiency, to address their vitamin D intake, because then they can actually reduce their morbidity in the winter months, whether it's from any respiratory infections. There's now quite good documented observation studies that show clear association between a more serious progress in a more serious COVID infection and low vitamin D deficiency. This could be also because the disease makes you kind of use up a lot of vitamin D, but it's been shown in a recent study that people, for example, last year were shown to have low vitamin D levels are overrepresented in cases with a more serious COVID infection this year. So it's wise, I think, to forego having vitamin D levels. There's the question as to whether taking vitamin D supplements will improve your outcome. Corona is still a question that needs an answer. Donald Trump was treated with, amongst many other things, and anything that's associated with Donald Trump tends to be ridiculed. But there is now a serious study in the UK that started quite recently, a randomized control study, where they're giving 2 different levels of vitamin D supplementation to prove D deficiency. And one of their outcome measures is whether these people develop go on to develop a more serious course of the disease, and whether the high level vitamin D protects this. This is something we'll need to wait.
Before we can give it, we can go ahead. Thank you. Does that mean probably at this during winter, and especially you'd advise people to vitamin D just as a prevention, or any advice? How to think about it?
Okay. I'm not speaking. This is my opinion, but it is based on literature and also on national recommendations. The Norwegian Health Directorate commissioned a report 2 years ago. This was published 2 years ago by a group of experts that already then made recommendations that in a public health perspective, vitamin D should again be put on the agenda, that we perhaps need to enrich the foods with more vitamin D, and the people with vitamin D. That was 2 years ago. And the groups that they pinpointed in particular were elderly people, also pensioners. They've pinpointed also people with migrant background. I suppose that's a proxy for saying people with brown skin, and also teenagers. So their recommendations were that people with the at-risk groups, so teenagers, people with brown skin, and people over 70 years old. I think it's actually 75. Their recommendation. They recommend that one takes make sure that one gets at least 10 micrograms of vitamin D through the diet every day. And that can be done in various ways. It can be done supplement, or it can be done through the right type of diet. But people 75 should take actually 20 micrograms a day. Now these are quite conservative recommendations. These recommendations are now echoed by, in relation to COVID, these recommendations have now been echoed by the physician and also by hormone specialists associations in the United States. They're saying that in light of the findings we have showing that low vitamin D is associated with a more serious corona infection, that people are trying to supplement their diets or ensure that their diets have enough vitamin D.
Okay. I'll ask you two questions on that one. You're talking about the to take vitamin D, and also like dark pigmentation. They have a good retention. What about those who are now areas where there's enough sun? So for them, it's like they don't need so much. Because we're talking about corona, everywhere. Those who are in the light already, should they continue taking this some vitamin D? And you're explaining, can you explain a little bit about the use why are they in a vulnerable?
Well, I'm basing that on this expert report that published 2 years ago, where they found in surveys done in videregående skole, high school, that 1 in 6 had vitamin D deficiency. So why is a very good question. It may be because life is not necessarily so conducive to getting enough sunlight exposure. We spend a lot more time outdoors and covered up. The more our skin recover and the less we're outdoors, especially when the sun is high in the sky, then we're not going to get enough sun exposure. And also maybe, again, a knowledge is right in the diet. Maybe I should say a little bit about the sort of foods. Probably the number one supplement, or the dietary requirement would be to take cod liver oil.
Cod liver oil.
And that, yeah. And this is, I think, in the sense, part of the Norwegian
soul.
So I think that's also why there's an assumption in Scandinavia that everybody gets enough vitamin D, because perhaps there's an assumption that traditionally everybody takes enough cod liver oil. But with more modern diets, with more fast food, more modern life, this is maybe lacking in certain groups, maybe youngsters, maybe people from migrant backgrounds without this tradition. And also people who don't absorb enough, for example, if you're elderly. But basically, 2 capsules of cod liver oil or a tablespoon or a couple of teaspoons of cod liver oil is going to give you enough every day. Then you don't have to think anymore about it. So as I said, I don't have any shares in this. It's something like, but that's the easiest way. And there's also good reasons to perhaps go for a more natural option, which you can buy also from the pharmacy, and that's because cod liver oil is a natural product. The tablets are also produced in a sense naturally, but it may be in a form which is less easily absorbed. So there are issues about also different vitamin D type supplements and how easily they're absorbed. So cod liver oil, it being probably the closest to a natural supplement, is probably the best option. After that, surprisingly enough, for me, that's my ignorance after living on this planet for years. I'm not aware as a doctor that the mushrooms are very rich in vitamin D, which again is part of our tradition in Norway, that you go out in the autumn and collect mushrooms and eat mushrooms and bring up your stores of vitamin D. But mushrooms, you need maybe to eat maybe 40 grams of mushrooms every day to give yourself the 10 microgram recommended dose in your diet. After that, it's the oily fish type. So your salmon, your mackerel, your sardines, these are the in fish oil. So between anything from 50 to 100 grams of this eaten every day is going to give you your necessary requirement as recommended by the working group for the health.
The Ministry of Health. Yeah.
So you need to eat twice as much if you're over 75, and it's not going to hurt to eat twice as much if you have brown skin or vitamin D deficient, because it's difficult to overdose on vitamin D on the supplement tablets that are available in the pharmacy. If you take one tablet of just about any of the supplements that are available without a prescription, take one tablet a day, you can't overdose. Obviously, you take too many of those tablets, you can perhaps, but then you're consciously overdosing is not necessary. But other than that, you've got lean fish, which has less vitamin D. Eggs, you need to eat maybe about 8 to 10 eggs every day. That might not be particularly
because
other reasons
not
like cholesterol. But again, eggs are also as is butter and other dairy products. And then there are also foods where they've been fortified with vitamin D. That's kind of maybe that's
the list you could talk about. You've talked about mushrooms. One thing I often know about mushrooms is that you're not supposed to take so much mushrooms, and then eggs. You're not supposed to take so much eggs. So it's like we have to moderate everything.
So yes, and obviously if you have a medical condition like you've got cardiovascular disease, and your doctor's saying you must regulate be careful, wary of your intake of cholesterol, then taking a vitamin D which doesn't contain anything other than vitamin D is going to be a healthier option for you. You asked also what would be my recommendation. I think if you may also ask what are the symptoms of vitamin D deficiency. There are different ways of measuring or different the levels of vitamin D you measure in the blood are expressed in different units, depending whether you're in the USA or in different parts of the world. But in Norway, we talk about nanomoles per liter. And if you're over 50, you have a normal vitamin D level. If you're below 25, then you have vitamin deficiency. If you're between 25 and 50, you have an insufficient vitamin D level. In terms of how much vitamin D supplement should you take, again, the recommendations are 10 micrograms every day if you have throughout the year, basically. And if you're over 75, then you should be taking 20. Basically around the year. Not getting a lot of sun exposure. Not sun exposure. If you perhaps consider that you may have vitamin D deficiency, then you see your maybe to measure the level. There isn't a particular symptom which is classical vitamin D deficiency. The symptoms people normally have are fairly diffuse, fairly vague. So maybe it's headaches, muscle aches, bone aches, joint aches. There may be fairly vague symptoms. So a doctor needs to think about measuring the level in order to know that you have vitamin D deficiency. But if you have brown skin, you're not out and about a lot, you cover up a lot, then question whether you have had enough in the diet, then you need to maybe get your vitamin D levels measured before you start taking higher levels of supplements.
Okay. There's a question. Someone is asking, like, if, for example, you go to the doctor, they've told you the much you need to take, and then you've done that, but there are still say your vitamin D level is low. What do you do?
Right. As I said, I'm an obstetrician. This is not my day job. But yeah, if you have been shown to have a vitamin D level of less than 5 nanomoles per liter, then you'll probably put on something close to 80 micrograms a day, and then they'll measure your levels again to see if your levels have increased. And if they haven't, then there's some reason why you're not responding. And it may be that, for example, the type of vitamin D supplement you take, the base vitamin D supplements, are not as easily absorbed by the body as those that are, for example, these more synthetic versions may not be absorbed as well. There may be medical reasons why you're not absorbing or metabolizing the vitamin D. So, as I said, the random control trial I was mentioning that's now started in the UK, that's being it's coming out of Queen Mary University London. They're basically taking people who are vitamin D deficient, and they're giving them either 20 micrograms or 80 micrograms daily. So those are amounts which are allowed in a randomized control trial. They're deemed you're not going to get dangerously high levels of vitamin D if you start off deficient and are on 80 micrograms. And as long as you again are monitoring your levels to see if they increase or not, then you're safe. But I think I would have to go back to start isn't increasing, and maybe look at the type of vitamin D one is taking.
Yeah, because this person is taking the teaspoon. Yeah.
Teaspoon or a teaspoon. That will give you maybe 10 micrograms. So that if she is shown to be deficient, then that's probably not going to push her vitamin D levels up enough, especially now in the winter when there's no sunlight to produce anymore. So it may be, again, according to the Norwegian Association of Endocrinologists, when they, according to their guidelines, if you have proven vitamin D deficiency, then you'll be started on a supplementation of, I think it's 80 micrograms a day for 3 months, and then they'll measure your levels. So I think he or she needs to speak to their GP again and ask if they need to maybe increase what amount of supplements they're on and whether it's safe to increase.
Thank you so much. As we close, Dr. What do you tell people now? Actually, we are starting new rules from today, right? Corona is going up. We are going to winter. So, last quarter, you're also working as a doctor, so probably here and there, both with vitamin D, just the whole
Okay. Well, let's say keep to the recommendations, the government recommendations in terms of facial cover. I mean, face mask is face, and what is the other one in the UK? But the facial mask in areas where you're in close contact with other people, in terms of keeping social or physical distance from people, and also considering how many people you're actually affecting, maybe doing circulating around. Taking vitamin D, these are things that are going to stop us getting the virus onto us. And the whole of keeping healthy, maintaining normal vitamin D levels is not that it's necessarily going to help direct the virus, but it will keep our bodies strong and able to resist other infections and perhaps corona infection. And if you consider this, that if on a population level people have a more of a focus on their vitamin D level, we have a higher maintained normal vitamin D levels, then we may actually see a reduction in the annual incidence of respiratory tract infections, the annual incidence of hospital admissions because of serious respiratory tract infections, and that's going to save resources in the health service for dealing with serious COVID and other serious diseases. So I think there's a lot to win by addressing one's vitamin D intake and maintaining normal vitamin D levels, and there's very little to lose. Very difficult if you follow the Ministry of Health's directives. Is very difficult to do this. I mean, I'd have to eat. Okay. Possible. I mean, take if you don't like the cod liver oil in a teaspoon, then capsules.
Because it really doesn't taste well.
It doesn't. It's nice. No, I had it as a child, and I didn't like it. But that's take the capsules if you don't like the taste.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pashi, for sharing the time. I know you have a that's why we had to do this in the course of the day. But anyone who has a question, we have contacted Dr. Pashi. Otherwise, till next week, and have a nice evening.